If you're trying to burn fat, control cravings, and stay in ketosis longer, what you drink in the morning may matter more than what you eat all day. Today, I want to show you how to make keto coffee the right way, not the trendy way, not the sugar-loaded cafe version, but the version that actually supports fat burning, brain energy, and metabolic health. Most people believe fat loss is about calories, discipline, or willpower, but the truth is far more unsettling and far more hopeful. Your body does not burn fat because you eat less. It burns fat because insulin allows it to. And every single morning, before you eat a bite of food, your body is standing at a metabolic crossroads, deciding whether it will burn stored fat or lock it away for another day. That decision is controlled by one hormone, insulin. When you wake up, insulin is naturally low. This is not an accident. During sleep, your body shifts into repair mode, tapping into stored fat to fuel vital organs and brain activity. Studies show that during this fasted state, fat oxidation is already elevated, even before caffeine enters the picture. But the moment insulin rises, even slightly, fat burning slows dramatically, not gradually, dramatically. Research from metabolic wards has shown that insulin doesn't need to spike high to shut down lipolysis. Even modest elevations can reduce fat burning by more than 50%. This is why breakfast matters more than people realize. Not because of calories, but because of insulin signaling. A bowl of cereal, a slice of toast, a splash of flavored creamer, all of it sends the same message to your cells. Stop burning fat, start storing energy. And once that signal is sent, it can take hours to reverse. This is where keto coffee enters the conversation, not as a trend, not as a luxury drink, but as a metabolic intervention. Coffee alone already has a powerful effect on fat metabolism. Caffeine increases catecholamines like adrenaline and noradrenaline, which tell fat cells to release stored fatty acids into the bloodstream. This is well documented in exercise physiology and obesity research. Coffee also activates AMPK, an enzyme often described as the body's metabolic master switch, pushing cells toward burning fuel instead of storing it. But coffee by itself is only half the story. If caffeine releases fat, insulin decides whether that fat gets burned or wasted. Here is the shocking part most people never hear. You can release fat from fat cells and still fail to lose fat if insulin is elevated. Those fatty acids will simply be recycled back into storage. This is why people say, I drink coffee, I exercise, I eat less, but nothing changes. The signal is wrong. Keto coffee works because it preserves the low insulin environment while supplying a fuel that does not interrupt fat burning. Medium-chain triglycerides and certain saturated fats do not behave like carbohydrates or even like most dietary fats. They bypass insulin-dependent pathways and move directly to the liver, where they are converted into ketones. Ketones are not just an alternative fuel, they are a metabolic signal. They tell your brain and your body that energy is available without glucose. This changes everything. When ketones rise, hunger hormones like ghrelin drop. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor increases, improving focus and mood. Inflammation markers decline. Most importantly, the body stays in fat-burning mode instead of switching into storage. Clinical studies on ketogenic metabolism show that ketone presence reduces the need for insulin, allowing lipolysis to continue uninterrupted. This is why keto coffee is not about energy. It is about hormonal permission. Insulin is the gatekeeper. When it is low, fat can leave storage. When it is high, fat is trapped, even if you are starving yourself. This is why calorie-restricted diets fail long-term and why people regain weight even when eating less than before. They are fighting hormones with math. Keto coffee changes the signal without triggering hunger. It allows people to extend the natural overnight fast without white-knuckling through cravings. And this matters because intermittent fasting studies consistently show improved insulin sensitivity, lower fasting insulin levels, and increased fat oxidation when fasting is extended safely. But there is a deeper layer that makes this even more compelling. Insulin resistance does not begin with blood sugar. It begins with chronically elevated insulin. Long before glucose numbers look abnormal, insulin is already working overtime, silently blocking fat loss and driving weight gain. Researchers have found that many individuals labeled normal have fasting insulin levels high enough to prevent effective fat burning. They are metabolically stuck, and they don't know why. Keto coffee can help interrupt that cycle by giving the body energy without demanding insulin. Over time, this reduces the need for constant insulin secretion and allows cells to regain sensitivity. This is not theory. This is observed in clinical ketogenic interventions used for epilepsy, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome. But this tool is powerful precisely because it is specific. If you add sugar, honey, flavored syrups, or even excessive milk, the entire mechanism collapses. Insulin rises, ketone production drops, fat burning shuts down. The body receives mixed signals, and mixed signals always lead to metabolic confusion. This is why people say keto didn't work for them. Not because the biology failed, but because the signal was never clean. Used correctly, keto coffee does something remarkable. It teaches the body that it is safe to burn fat. That stored energy is accessible. That starvation is not occurring. This reduces stress hormones over time, stabilizes appetite, and makes fat loss feel almost boring, which is exactly how sustainable health should feel. But the most important truth is this: keto coffee does not burn fat for you. It removes the hormonal roadblock that was stopping you from burning your own. Your body already knows how to do this. It did it for thousands of years before modern food disrupted insulin signaling. Keto coffee simply restores the conditions under which fat burning is allowed to happen again. And once insulin is no longer in control, fat loss stops being a fight and starts being a natural consequence of biology working as it was designed to. That is why keto coffee works. Not because it adds something magical, but because it finally stops doing the one thing that was blocking everything else. For decades, fat was blamed as the villain behind weight gain, heart disease, and metabolic collapse. Grocery shelves filled with low-fat labels, while waistlines quietly expanded and chronic illness exploded. What most people don't realize is that the problem was never fat itself. It was which fats and how they interact with human biology. And nowhere is this truth more clearly exposed than in the science behind keto coffee. Not all fats are equal in the body. Some fats demand insulin, slow digestion, and get stored almost immediately. Others behave in a completely different way, so different, in fact, that the body treats them less like food and more like a metabolic signal. Medium-chain triglycerides, or MCTs, fall into this second category, and their effects on fat burning are so powerful that researchers originally studied them for medical therapy, not weight loss. MCTs are absorbed directly from the gut into the portal vein and transported straight to the liver. They bypass the lymphatic system entirely. That detail matters more than most people understand. Long-chain fats must be broken down, packaged into chylomicrons, circulated through the bloodstream, and slowly delivered to tissues. MCTs skip all of that. Within minutes, they reach the liver and are converted into ketones, an energy source that does not require insulin to be used. This is not a marketing claim. This is basic human physiology. Ketones are unique because they act as both fuel and messenger. When ketone levels rise, the brain receives a powerful signal that energy is available without glucose. Appetite decreases. Mental clarity increases. Inflammation drops. Studies in neurobiology have shown that ketones improve mitochondrial efficiency, meaning cells produce more energy with less oxidative stress. This is why people often report feeling calm, focused, and alert after consuming MCTs, even without eating a full meal. But MCTs don't work alone. Grass-fed butter and ghee contain saturated fats that modern nutrition guidelines have misunderstood for decades. These fats were consumed by humans long before industrial seed oils ever existed. One of the most important compounds in butter is butyrate, a short-chain fatty acid that serves as the primary fuel for the cells lining the colon. Butyrate has been shown to strengthen the gut barrier, reduce systemic inflammation, and even improve insulin sensitivity. Here's the part that shocks most people. Chronic inflammation blocks fat loss. When the body is inflamed, cortisol rises, insulin resistance worsens, and fat storage increases, especially around the abdomen. By supporting gut health and reducing inflammation, the fats in grass-fed butter indirectly make fat burning easier. This is not about calories. This is about signaling safety to the body. When the body feels safe, it lets go of stored energy. This is why the combination of coffee, MCT oil, and quality saturated fat works differently than any other diet drink. Coffee stimulates fat release. MCTs convert rapidly into ketones. Butter stabilizes the gut and reduces inflammatory stress. Together, they create a hormonal environment where fat burning is allowed to continue instead of being shut down. But there is another layer that most people never consider. Fat's slow gastric emptying, which means energy is released steadily instead of crashing. This stabilizes blood sugar, even in people with insulin resistance. Research on ketogenic diets shows that stable blood sugar reduces hunger, cravings, and binge-eating behavior, not through willpower, but through biology. When blood sugar stops swinging, the brain stops panicking. This is why people who use the right fats often say, "I forgot to eat." That is not disordered eating. That is metabolic regulation returning. However, this power cuts both ways. Use the wrong fats and everything collapses. Vegetable oils, hydrogenated fats, and omega-6 heavy seed oils create oxidative stress, damage mitochondria, and worsen insulin resistance. These fats do not produce ketones. They do not support metabolic health. They inflame the system while pretending to be harmless. Studies have linked excessive omega-6 intake to obesity, fatty liver disease, and chronic inflammation, conditions that make fat loss nearly impossible. This is why simply adding fat to coffee doesn't work. The type of fat determines the outcome, and then there's the dose. Too much fat too early can stall progress, not because fat is bad, but because the body will always burn what you give it before touching what you've stored. Keto coffee is not meant to drown the system in calories. It is meant to provide just enough fat to signal abundance without excess. This delicate balance is what separates metabolic healing from metabolic stagnation. Clinical ketogenic protocols used for epilepsy and diabetes are extremely precise for this reason. Ketone levels matter, insulin levels matter, timing matters. Keto coffee works best when it replaces breakfast, not when it stacks on top of it. Used strategically, it extends fasting, deepens ketosis, and trains the body to rely on stored fat. And this training matters because metabolic flexibility, the ability to switch between fuels, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term health. People who lack this flexibility are constantly hungry, constantly tired, and constantly storing fat. People who regain it feel steady, focused, and free from obsession with food. The right fats help restore that flexibility. What makes this so powerful is that it does not require extreme restriction. It does not require suffering. It requires understanding. Understanding that the body responds to signals, not slogans, to hormones, not hype. When you choose MCT oil over sugar, butter over creamer, and metabolic signals over empty stimulation, you are not adding fat. You are removing confusion. You are telling your body that it does not need to hoard energy for survival. And when that message is received consistently, fat loss stops being forced and starts happening naturally. This is why the right fats matter. Not because they are trendy, not because they are indulgent, but because they speak the body's native metabolic language, one that modern nutrition forgot, but human biology never did. Most people fail with keto coffee for the same reason they fail with almost every health strategy. They turn a precision tool into a daily habit without understanding its purpose. What begins as a metabolic advantage slowly becomes a silent obstacle, and by the time progress stalls, no one can explain why. The truth is uncomfortable but essential. Keto coffee is powerful precisely because it is situational, not universal. Your body is not designed to run on constant incoming fuel. Human metabolism evolved around cycles of feeding and fasting, abundance and scarcity. For thousands of years, mornings often began without food, forcing the body to rely on stored energy. This wasn't dangerous, it was normal. In fact, research on metabolic flexibility shows that the ability to switch between glucose and fat is one of the strongest markers of metabolic health. When that flexibility is lost, hunger becomes relentless, energy becomes unstable, and fat storage becomes the default. Keto coffee can restore that flexibility, but only if it is used strategically. When consumed in the morning instead of breakfast, keto coffee extends the overnight fast without triggering hunger. This matters because fasting lowers insulin, increases fat oxidation, and improves insulin sensitivity over time. Clinical studies on time-restricted eating show reductions in fasting insulin and improvements in metabolic markers even without calorie reduction. The body doesn't just burn fat, it relearns how to access it. But here's the critical detail most people ignore. Fasting works because it creates a temporary energy gap. Keto coffee works because it fills that gap just enough without breaking the hormonal conditions that make fat burning possible. This balance is delicate. When keto coffee is consumed alongside breakfast or layered on top of an already fed state, the body receives a very different message. Instead of use stored energy, the signal becomes external fuel is abundant. Insulin may not spike dramatically, but fat burning slows anyway. The body will always burn what you give it before touching what it has saved. This is not failure. It is survival biology. This is why some people gain weight on keto without understanding how. They are eating the right foods at the wrong times, constantly feeding the system just enough to prevent access to stored fat. Studies on overfeeding, even with low-carbohydrate diets, show that excess energy still suppresses fat loss when insulin remains chronically elevated or energy intake never dips. Keto coffee is not meant to be a comfort drink. It is meant to replace a meal, not accompany one. This distinction is everything. Used correctly, keto coffee reduces decision fatigue, stabilizes energy, and eliminates the blood sugar crashes that drive cravings. It becomes a bridge, a way to move from dependence on constant eating to metabolic independence. But when used daily without intention, it becomes a crutch. The body adapts. Fat loss slows. Hunger cues blur. Progress stalls. Adaptation is not a flaw, it is a feature. The human body is exceptionally good at adjusting to patterns. When it senses that a certain amount of fat energy arrives every morning like clockwork, it stops dipping into reserves. This is why long-term weight loss requires variability. Studies on metabolic adaptation show that repeating the same intake at the same time trains the body to expect it and to conserve accordingly. This is why keto coffee works best when it is used selectively. On days with mental demand, long mornings, or extended fasting, keto coffee can be a powerful ally. On days when hunger is low, skipping it entirely may accelerate fat loss. On days when training or stress is high, reducing fat and increasing electrolytes may be the smarter move. This flexibility keeps the body responsive instead of resistant. Another overlooked factor is stress. Caffeine combined with fat can elevate cortisol in sensitive individuals, especially when sleep is poor. Chronically elevated cortisol blocks fat loss, increases insulin resistance, and promotes abdominal fat storage. Research shows that stress hormones can override dietary interventions, even in calorie-controlled environments. Keto coffee late in the day or consumed during periods of high stress can quietly work against its own purpose. This is why timing matters more than tradition. Keto coffee is most effective in the early part of the day, aligned with natural circadian rhythms. Morning cortisol is meant to be higher. It mobilizes energy. Late-day stimulation disrupts sleep, and poor sleep alone can increase insulin resistance by over 30% in as little as 1 week. No nutritional strategy can overcome chronic sleep disruption. There is also a psychological layer that cannot be ignored. When keto coffee becomes a daily ritual instead of a strategic choice, people stop listening to hunger signals. They drink it out of habit, not need. This disconnect erodes metabolic intuition, the ability to sense when the body needs fuel and when it does not. Long-term success comes not from rigid routines, but from responsive patterns. This is why the most successful ketogenic protocols emphasize reassessment. They adjust fat intake, timing, and frequency based on results, not ideology. They understand that fat is a lever, not a constant. Pull it when needed, release it when not. Perhaps the most important truth is this: keto coffee does not cause fat loss. It allows fat loss under the right conditions. Those conditions include low insulin, energy demand, hormonal balance, and strategic restraint. Remove any one of those, and the tool loses its edge. This is why people argue endlessly about whether keto coffee works. They are debating outcomes without examining context. In medicine, context determines effectiveness. So does dosage, so does timing. Keto coffee is no different. Keto. When used with intention, it simplifies life. It reduces hunger, sharpens focus, and supports fat burning without struggle. When used mindlessly, it becomes another source of excess, one that hides behind good intentions and clean ingredients. The difference between progress and plateau is not discipline, it is understanding. Keto coffee is not a rule, it is a strategy. And like all strategies, it works best when you know when to use it and when to let it go.